Dzień dobry, witam Was wszystkich. Z tej strony Artur Skorupa z firmy SAP. Dzisiaj chcemy Wam zaprezentować kolejny z cyklu wykładów Hack Your Career poświęcony pracy Technical Writera w Kymie. Na wstępie, zanim zaczniemy, chciałbym jeszcze Was poprosić o mały test połączenia, czy nas słyszycie. Także jeżeli nas słyszycie, to możecie zareagować jakoś na Zoomie. Tam jest taka opcja Reactions, możecie, nie wiem, podnieść rękę w górę albo coś takiego, więc dzięki, widzę pierwszą rękę w górze, także wszystko jest OK. Super. Dzisiejszym prezenterem będzie Maja, która właśnie pokaże Wam tajniki tej zacnej i bardzo, bardzo ciekawej roli Technical Writera na podstawie naszego projektu Kyma. Dalej, możemy jechać. Jeżeli chodzi o agendę dzisiejszego spotkania, no to przywitanie, które niniejszym tutaj się dzieje. Następnie przejdziemy do sedna, do prezentacji. Na koniec sesja na pytania. Jeżeli podczas prezentacji macie jakieś pytania, prośba zadawajcie je na czacie. Jest opcja czatowania na Zoomie. Postaramy się właśnie na koniec poświęcić 10 minutek na odpowiedź, także będziemy je zbierać i pytania na końcu. Jeżeli chodzi o cykl wykładów, to jak być może niektórzy z Was wiedzą, jest to coś, co się dzieje podczas, można powiedzieć, semestru. Jest to ostatni z cyklu wykładów. Poprzednie były bardzo ciekawe, nagrania są dostępne na stronie, która tutaj teraz jest podana na ekranie. Ja ją jeszcze za chwileczkę na czat wrzucę, będziecie sobie mogli kliknąć wtedy. To jest ostatni z cyklu wykładów. W przyszłym semestrze startujemy z nowym cyklem, więc będziemy to reklamowali wkrótce na kanałach na Facebooku i na naszej stronie. Na wstępie chciałbym Wam powiedzieć kilka słów o tym, kim jesteśmy, czym się zajmujemy jako nasz SAP Lab. Jesteśmy centrum R&D zlokalizowanym w Gliwicach firmy SAP. To jest jedno z 21 światowych centrów R&D naszej firmy. Nasza działalność skupia się na wytwarzaniu produktów dla wielu branży, w szczególności e-commerce, social commerce, gdzie skupiamy się na analizie rynków, dostawie towarów, wielokanałowej sprzedaży i analizie zachowań klienta. To tak z grubsza można powiedzieć, że w te elementy celują nasze produkty. Co ważne, uczestniczymy we wszystkich etapach produktyzacji, czyli od wypracowania koncepcji, zbadania, zrobienia różnego rodzaju, nie wiem, makiet, prób, poprzez realizację i do wsparcia produkcyjnego. Głównie skupiamy się na oprogramowaniu chmurowym obecnie, na różnego rodzaju nowych technologiach, takich jak Go, Kubernetes, czy Lambda Functions. I teraz nie byłoby tego wszystkiego, naszych wszystkich produktów, gdyby nie ludzie, którzy nad nimi pracują. Ludzie są naszą podstawą, ludzie, zespoły są podstawą naszego sukcesu. W Gliwickim Labie pracuje około 350 osób, z czego 80% to są inżynierowie. Dzielimy się na różnego rodzaju zespoły. Są zespoły produktowe, zespoły projektowe, innovation teams, support teams. Także generalnie można powiedzieć, że te nasze struktury zespołów kształtują się tak, aby właśnie efektywnie wytwarzać i potem wspierać wdrożenie tych naszych produktów. Rola Technical Writera, o której dzisiaj będzie Maja opowiadała, jest obecna w większości tych zespołów, szczególnie na etapie właśnie koncepcji i wytwarzania, więc tutaj też jest to po prostu życiowy przykład, który zaraz Wam będziemy też pokazywali. Pokazywać tę rolę będziemy na przykładzie naszego projektu Kyma, który tworzymy razem z Mają i wieloma innymi koleżankami i kolegami w Gliwicach i nie tylko w Gliwicach, bo na świecie. Jest to projekt open source'owy, którego głównym celem jest to, aby umożliwić rozszerzanie różnego rodzaju aplikacji monolitycznych, czy jakichś różnych istniejących sobie gdzieś tam na świecie aplikacji, rozszerzanie ich w chmurze, czyli z jednej strony mamy chmurę zainstalowaną Kymą, jest to na przykład na, nie wiem, Amazonie zainstalowana instancja Kubernetes wraz z różnymi systemami takimi dookoła, które są zbundlowane w jedną paczkę, która się nazywa Kyma. No i generalnie Kyma pozwala nam na przykład na przetwarzanie eventów pochodzących z jednego systemu, łączenie tego z drugim systemem, podglądanie logów do tej całości, czy też uruchamianie różnego rodzaju funkcji lambda, czyli takich prostych kawałków kodu, które na przykład w jakiś sposób potrafią przetworzyć event, zareagować w jakiś sposób, także generalnie w interfejsie graficznym można sobie bardzo łatwo to wyklikać, połączyć i jest tak jakby bardzo nisko postawiony taki próg wejścia dla architektów, programistów z ich aplikacjami właśnie w ten świat chmurowy. Co ważne, jest to projekt open source'owy, gdzie tutaj kontrybuują do niego ludzie z całego świata, w tym też nasi pracownicy naszego laba. Jest to o tyle fajne, bo właśnie Maja na żywym przykładzie będzie Wam mogła pokazać efekty naszej pracy, czyli źródła. Jeżeli chodzi jeszcze o coś, co zapomniałem powiedzieć na początku, na koniec wykładu będziemy Was prosili o wypełnienie ankiety, także ten link się też gdzieś pojawi na ekranie w trakcie prezentacji, także będzie nam miło, jeżeli dacie nam feedback po wykładzie. I teraz chciałbym przekazać już głos Mai, która opowie też troszeczkę o sobie i potem przejdzie do sedna wykładu. Także Maja, zapraszam, dziękuję.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Maja. I'm a technical writer at SAP Labs Poland, and I have a bachelor's degree in both English and computer science. Previously, I taught English in kindergartens and language schools in Poland and China. And I'm also a writer at językowa.pl, where we create content on languages and language learning. If you're interested, you're welcome to visit and poke around. So what I want to talk about today is the job of a technical writer, what a technical writer does. And it is, like Artur said, based on our open source project, Kyma. I also want to tell you what technical documentation is and how we create it. I will mention the documentation as code approach, and I will demo it for you briefly. And I will mention a few useful tools, such as Git, GitHub, Markdown, and provide some useful resources for you on documentation in form of links. Now, a quick disclaimer, what I will show today is the way we do it in Kyma. So it might differ it might look differently in different companies or even different projects. And it is also, the presentation is on the introductory level. So these are basics. If you have no experience, that's okay. Now, if you wonder why it's in English, there are a few reasons. First of all, the working language in our company is English. So we talk about these things in English on a day-to-day basis. And even if we speak in Polish, even when we are speaking in Polish, we will still use the English terms for these. And chances are, if I use Polish, we all would have a hard time understanding what I mean. And the second reason is, if you're interested in technical documentation, even as a user, a reader, you should be able to understand it. So there shouldn't be any problems. Okay, so now that you know all that, let's get started. The technical writer, who is it? Now, the technical writer is not a translator or an editor. We do not translate or edit content, we create content. This is important. We are part of the development team. So we're not an addition to the team, not an extra that creates documentation. We are part of the development team. And as such, we are co-responsible for the whole product. Technical writer creates, reviews, and maintains documentation and other technical content. More on that in a second. Now, what does it mean? Creating means that we work with a subject matter expert. It might be a developer, it might be a product owner or a software development manager or another subject matter expert. But most often it will be a developer. Now, we create the content based on the input that we're given. It might be in an oral or written form. It might be a conversation or a note, a code if you're into that. product knowledge, that all depends on you and the expert and how you two prefer to work with each other. We created according to guidelines, which are a set of rules that you need to follow, and they are there to make sure that the documentation is consistent. I will talk about guidelines later in detail. Now we also review content. When you create documentation, you cannot publish it right away. It first needs to be reviewed. This is because everybody makes mistakes, and that's okay. We just want to make sure that those mistakes are caught before they get into production. It's just sort of a double checking. And just as your content is reviewed, you also review other people's content. And most often it will be other technical writers, but sometimes it will also be developers, because sometimes when a document is very short, it's just easier for the developer to create it and pass it to a technical writer for a review than organize a meeting or explain it when the explanation would take longer than just creating the document. When we review the documents and the content, we check the language. So we make sure that it's correct, but we also make sure that it is appropriate, clear, and easy to understand. We also check the style and formatting. So we make sure that it conforms to those guidelines I mentioned. And we make sure that it is readable and user-friendly and helpful. We want to make sure that the way it is styled and formatted helps the user understand, because the content is created for someone who wants to learn, not for someone who already knows these things. Now we also check the content, not just the language. So we try to get in the user's shoes and ask ourselves, do I understand it? Is it clear or ambiguous? And we check the accuracy and correctness. So we make sure that the document is to the point, and we check if everything that's written there is correct. So maybe the URLs, the names, the diagrams, and so on. Does it say what it should? Is it valid? And if it's testable, we test it. So you might have a tutorial with steps to perform to obtain a certain result. And those steps might include commands to run, to execute. So you need to run those commands before you approve it, because you put your name on it when you approve it. So you don't want to release something that's broken. Now, a technical writer also maintains content. It means updating the existing documentation, because changes in code call for changes in the documentation. When something is changed in the code, a new functionality is added, or an existing functionality is altered, the documentation also needs to be updated, so it doesn't mislead the user. And sometimes we might also get feedback from users saying that maybe there's something missing, or maybe they don't quite understand what we mean here and we need to alter that. We also fix bugs, because even though we check the documentation before we publish it, we still might have some typos. We're just human. Or there might be dead links, which were valid at the time of writing, but have since stopped working because maybe the website was taken down or the product was discontinued. And we also might have, in theory we shouldn't, but in reality we might have outdated information where we, for example, miss something. And we need to pay attention to both text and pictures. So diagrams, screenshots, we cannot forget them. We also detect issues and record them and add them to our backlog on GitHub. So when we record an issue, when we log it, we don't start working on it right away. This is important. We work in Scrum. That means we work in sprints, sort of cycles. And we plan our work for those sprints ahead for upcoming sprints. So if we wanted to start working on something we just discovered right away, this would mean we would take away the time from those tasks that we already planned to do, that we already have to do, and we wouldn't be able to finish them. So that's a no, we don't do that. We also estimate and prioritize issues. Well, estimating means establishing roughly how big a task is, how much work it is, how much time it could take. And prioritizing means putting them in order, how important they are, because not all tasks are equally big and not all issues are equally urgent and critical. And this estimating and prioritizing issues facilitates planning of this work for the upcoming sprints. And obviously, we solve the existing issues and tasks that we planned. Now, what is the content that we develop? First of all, this is documentation, and it can be divided into user-facing documentation and internal documentation. An example of user-facing documentation will be functionality. So we have a new feature or a functionality. We want to tell the user what it is about, what they can do with it, just give them an overview. Then it's also configuration. So we have some parameters that the user can adjust, can choose different values, can configure. So we need to describe that because we cannot expect them to know this out of the box. We need to tell them what they can do with this and what are the allowed values and things they can do with it. Then we have tutorials. So these contain a list of steps that a user needs to perform to obtain a certain result. I already mentioned that. Because, like I said, we cannot expect the user to just know it out of the blue, just know what to do. We need to tell them, we need to teach them how to use the product. And it also is the user interface text, because we create a product that has the web interface. And this also contains text, buttons, and we want to make sure that they are right, that they are adjusted to the user, they are correct, clear. So this is also something that we check. Now the internal documentation might be the developer guides or how-tos, because sometimes a developer might have an action that they only perform once a month, let's say, or every release. And this is a long process, a long list of steps that they need to perform. But there's a lot of time before one release and the other. And they might forget because in the meantime, they do a lot of different work. So we don't want to forget that. We don't want them to forget. So we write it down and keep it as internal documentation as kind of a help to us, to ourselves. Now, we also have processes. This might be the process for onboarding when we have a new employee. What steps should be taken? What should be done? Apart from documentation, we have, for example, release notes. Those are notes that tell the user when we release, for example, the new version of our software, it tells the user what are the new features that we added, what are the changes. It gives them an overview and a brief description. We also have deprecation notes because sometimes it might happen that a certain functionality is not going to be supported any longer soon. And we want to let the user know in advance so they have time to prepare for it and maybe switch to another solution or just stop using it in a safe way. So we let them know that it will happen soon. A migration guide is a guide that tells the user how to migrate, for example, from an older version of software to a newer one, or from one platform to the other. And an example of a migration guide is here. And we also have media content, such as blog posts or videos, maybe some other content. And other means the content that is created as a one-off. For example, when there's a campaign organized in our project and someone is preparing a brochure for it and asks us to review it or to prepare it or help prepare it. So different kinds of one-off content. Now, when you create the documentation, you always need to remember about the context. So you need to ask yourself who you write for, because when you write the documentation, you will assume different things depending on the context. So you will write differently for a developer and differently for a CEO, because they might have a different understanding of technical concepts and also be focused on different things. A developer might want to know the technical stuff, while the CEO will be interested in the business value. And the purpose, what am I writing for? So the example questions are, is it internal or external? Does it have deadlines? And if so, what are they? What's the tone I should use? Because depending on all that, for example, the place of publication will vary. If it's internal, you will publish it somewhere else than if it's external, user-facing, and you want the user to see it. Now, what do you want to document? Because you don't want to document everything, because not everything brings value to the user. So first of all, you want to document the user-facing functionality. Imagine that you have a parking machine. Let's take it as an example. So an average user that wants to pay for their parking is not interested in the internal mechanism that distinguishes coins. They just want to know how to operate this machine to pay for their parking. Then we also need to document the configurable parameters or components. So for example, let's take this parking meter again. You might have different payment methods. So you may be able to pay by cash or by card, or maybe some loyalty card. This is something that the user can choose. They can configure it. So this needs to also be documented. In the case of software, it will be parameters, variables, and so on. Prerequisites. So what is required before you can start using the software? For our example, it might be different cards. If you want to pay by card, what cards are accepted? Possible values. So again, for our example, this might be the coins that are accepted, or even the currency. And then the how-tos and tutorials, guides. We need to, like I said, teach the user what they can do and how they can do it. Now we know what to document. So how to document that? First of all, there are the guidelines that I mentioned. They describe the structure of the whole repository, the place of, they might tell you where to put the documentation, but they also have templates for the documents. So they tell you what your documents should look like, what sections they should have, what sections are required and which are optional, and what order they should be put in, so that it's all consistent, coherent, and user-friendly. The guidelines also talk about the language. So they might say, they might specify that it should be simple, user-friendly, but also, since we write in English, they might specify the variety of English. Our guidelines say that we should use American English because, as you know, there are different varieties. There might be British, different varieties include British English, American English, Australian English, Indian English, South African English. So depending on what market you write for, you might want to choose a different variety. And they differ, for example, in spelling. So this also matters. Now, they also talk about grammar and punctuation. For example, should you use Oxford comma, or what tenses you can use or which ones you should avoid. Our guidelines say not to use passive voice because it is more difficult for non-native speakers to understand. They talk about formatting. So how to format, for example, parameter names, variable names, UI elements, tables, lists, and where and when to use them. Diagrams and screenshots, again, how to use them, how to format them, which tools to use to create them. And naming. This is important because when you work, you often don't use the full name of the product or the component. You sometimes use the working name. And when you create the documentation, you need to use the official name and you need to remember to use it. This is important because you don't want to confuse the reader. Even if the name is similar enough, you don't want to confuse the reader and make them wonder whether this is really what you meant here. This needs to be consistent. Now, the example of guidelines is here. These are screenshots of Kyma guidelines. If you're interested in them, the link to them will be provided at the end of the presentation. The first one talks about style and terminology. The other one talks about formatting, but there are more. So apart from guidelines, we also need to have the process set in place before we can start documenting. So like I said, we work in Scrum. So this describes or determines when we start working on tasks. Like I said, we plan work ahead with the team. We also review the content. Now, you need a review when you create documentation. You need a review from the content owner. In Kyma, that will be a technical writer, but a good practice is also to have a developer's review because, or the other subject matter expert, because they are the expert and you want to make sure that what you wrote is correct, that you understood them correctly. After all, they are the expert in the field, so it's a good practice to have them check that. But to publish it, you need to have it reviewed by another technical writer. And you require their approval. Your content requires their approval. Now, you cannot approve your own content, just in case you wondered. And you also need to decide on the tools and deployment before you start working. So where is it published? How do you create this documentation? And like I said, which tools you use. So in Kyma, we use Markdown. And this is a lightweight markup language which has a plain text formatting syntax. We publish the documentation to GitHub, which is a platform for hosting Git repositories, but with some bells and whistles. I'll mention it again in a minute. And on GitHub, our documentation has this basic GitHub look. So we also publish it, deploy it to the website, the Kyma Project.io website, where it is nicer looking, and it also contains, the website also contains the blog and some community info. And what's important is these are the same docs that we have in GitHub. They are just rendered more nicely on the website. We don't write it twice. We just have a team that maintains software that renders it there. Now, what are the qualities of good documentation? Let's go through some of them. So it should be simple. You cannot assume that your documentation will be read by native speakers. You probably create for the global market like we are, so you cannot assume that. Now, simple encompasses vocabulary. So don't use words like circumvention when you can use workaround, which is much simpler and easier to understand. But it also encompasses grammar. So like I said previously, don't use passive voice because it is more difficult to understand, and avoid complex tenses. When you don't absolutely have to use them, don't use them, use simple tenses. The documentation, good documentation should also be clear. Can I understand it? And a good rule of thumb is if you read it, can you repeat it with your own words? If you can, it's probably okay. It should be user-friendly. So it should be nice looking, well formatted, and it shouldn't be wordy. No one likes a wall of text. If you go to a store and want to buy new headphones and you have two boxes in front of you and one has 3 bullet points stating their advantages and the other one has the same thing written but as a wall of text, you will probably go with the first box, so with the first headphones. So don't do the wall of text. It should also be coherent and consistent throughout the whole documentation, throughout every doc. Even though many different people create your documentation, we don't want it to show. We want to make sure that the spelling, the vocabulary, the naming, the style, formatting, structure, and everything is the same throughout the whole documentation. Because the truth is, the guidelines, they are a big help to you, but they are not for you. They are for the user to make sure that they have a good user experience, that the documentation they read is consistent, that if it contains a certain kind of element, it always looks the same and they always know exactly what they are reading. And it should also be relevant. So describe only what's needed. Don't add obsolete info. If a user wants to read about installation, they are not interested in upgrade right now. If you add some additional information, they might not even get to actually installing it. And it should be helpful. Make sure that it is. Is the way it's described helpful? Does it help the user understand it? Those are the questions that you should ask yourself. Now, the documentation as code approach. What does it mean? Well, it means that the docs and code are developed and maintained equally. So the same processes and tools are applied for both docs and code. So the documentation is also created using an IDE, that is an integrated development environment, and the version control system is used. That is a system that keeps track of every change made to your files over time, but it's not like Dropbox. And thanks to that, it's easy to roll back if something's failing. And it's also tested. So you might ask yourself, okay, how do you test text? For example, the dead links, like I said, you check for the links if they still work, or you check for the forbidden formats. For example, your repository might only allow for PNGs, for images in the PNG format, and it should check if you're not trying to upload another one. It is also built and deployed. So, like I said, we publish the documentation to GitHub, where it is rendered as simple Markdown files. And we also deploy it to the website where it is rendered more nicely, and it is also good for product branding. Now, code and docs are released together as integral parts of the released functionality. So the documentation is not an addition to the functionality, it is its integral part. If you have no docs, then there's also no code, and vice versa. So that means that no docs can actually block the release. And you as a technical writer, as being part of the development team, have an actual influence on the release process. Now, I mentioned a few tools. So I already explained the version control system, and an example of such version control system is Git, which is a free, fast, and efficient open source system. And this is probably the most popular one. And if you'll only know one, then know this one. And I already said that GitHub is a platform for hosting Git repositories with extra features, such as it enables you to do a review, to add comments, approve content, run jobs on pull requests, and many more. I'll show it in the demo in a sec and an IDE. This is basically software for developing applications that consolidates different development tools. And popular ones are Visual Studio Code or Atom, but there are others as well. You can use them for writing code, but also for writing documentation, which we did. And the links to the ones I mentioned are provided here on the slide. So you can check them out later. And now let's go to the demo. So first, let me show you, this is the GitHub repository for our product Kyma. This is what a GitHub repository looks like. And here, the docs is where we keep our documentation. Just give me a second because I need to probably, yeah. Docs is where we keep the documentation. But for the demo purposes today, I created my own repository. And first here, and first I want to show you the jobs I mentioned. I said that you can run different jobs on pull requests, and an example of such a job for documentation might be checking for dead links or checking for typos. So I already prepared such jobs for this repository and prepared a pull request where I added intentional mistakes and typos.
So Maya, there is a request. There is a request to zoom the screen a bit, if it's possible.
Okay. Is it better now?
Yeah, it's better now.
Okay.
Thanks.
No worries. Thank you. Okay. So here I intentionally made a typo, and the job caught that. And here again, you have a typo. And here, this is interesting because the job is set to only accept the American spelling. So even though the word behavior in itself is correct, it's the British spelling. So it's also treated as typo here because we want American. And another example of a job is here. This one checks for broken links. You don't have to know that. This is just to show you. And here I intentionally added a link that doesn't exist. Let me show you. And a link to the README, which actually is called, let me show you, readme.md and not read.me. So it called that and printed it to you nicely. Now, I also created a pull request to show you what the review process looks like and the process of adding changes. So we have a pull request here that adds a PR template. This is what a pull request looks like. Now, you can go to files changed to see what the actual changes are. And here we see that the spaces here don't match the spaces here, so we're not really happy with that. We want to adjust that. So we can right away on the pull request suggest a change here. If we hover over this line and click this blue cross. Now you can either add a comment here and say something like please add a matching number of spaces and post that as a single comment or as a review, and then you can add multiple comments and then post them at once. Or you can edit that and you can edit this line right away here. So you press on this, insert a suggestion icon, this essentially copies this line, and you can edit it here right away. So we want to remove this obsolete space and update the comment. And now you have a preview here of what the changes are that you made. And as I'm the owner of the repo, and yeah, this is for the demo purposes, let's just commit it right away. So now this is applied. And we refresh. And we should now have, now it should be correct. Let me check if it, yes, here is my comment. When you click on it, you can see what you did. Okay. And now I cannot merge it yet because the job is running again here. So you need to wait for it until it runs and finishes. And now all the checks have passed. So from the job's perspective, it's ready to be merged, but you still need a review and an approval, like I said. So now I'm going to approve the pull request here. And now it's ready to be merged. And when I click this here, this will be published to the main branch in GitHub. Now it's changed to purple. Let's go to the main branch. And let's see. We now have this pull request template here with the comment message here. Now, if you create a new pull request, it will automatically be populated with this text. Now, I'll show you how to do this from the command line and how to create a pull request yourself. So what you need to do, first of all, when you want to contribute to someone else's repository, you fork it. You click here, fork. Because this is my repository, I will not fork it. I'll just show you then. You clone it. And you go to, okay. You go to your terminal. You navigate to the directory where you want to have this repo. I already am where I want it. And you type git clone and paste the URL. You wait a second until it downloads. Okay, it's ready. Just to be sure, here it is. Then you go to your IDE. So like I said, you can use Visual Studio Code or Atom, they are free. I have Goland, but that is not really free. Okay, and here it is automatically opened in the main branch. Here is the README file. But what we want to do now is, let me show you. I already prepared for you a Markdown basics guide, so you can try it later. But it's not complete yet. There's one thing that remains to be added. I want to add here how to add images in Markdown. So as you can see, there's some info missing. So let's do it now. Let's go to the file, Markdown basics. Okay, unintentionally I had an extra character. So let's create a new branch. We don't want to push straight to the main branch. Let's create a new branch. Git checkout -b and call it something like Markdown images. Okay, now you're here. And because I already removed this character, it already detected some changes. Now we want to remove the comment so it shows. And using Markdown, I will show you how to add comments. Images, sorry. So a good practice is to put your media files, your images in the assets folder, not to put them together with all the documents. Okay, this is a bit big, but okay. Let's add another one. And the cool thing about IDE is that it makes your job a lot easier. It often prompts you and just has a lot of shortcuts. And the last one, not a dog. Okay. All right. The rest of the document tells you how to create tables in Markdown, how to create lists, format text as code, how to add links, how to add headings, and how to make text bold and how to use italics. So you can read it later. I will provide a link for you. And now we need to add those changes to the staging area. We want to tell Git to take those changes into account. So we type git add, and this dot means to take into account everything in this directory. Okay, we can type git status to see what are the changes to be committed. And here you can see that this is the file. So it's all good. Now we need to commit the changes that we made. So that means kind of record them. The pattern that we follow in Kymie is we use an imperative when we type a commit message. The M is for message. So we want to describe what we changed here, what we are adding. Okay, I actually haven't added the images, the info, I only added images. Okay, this is how you actually add this. And the 3 ticks make sure that what I'm typing will be visible and not rendered as an image. Okay, so let's add this again. You need to save this file before, but my IDE does it for me. Okay, we're adding the message again. And now you need to push this to the repository because the changes now are only recorded locally. And when you push for the first time to a new branch, it will prompt you that it basically doesn't know where to push your changes. So it gives you this message and it prompts you what command to run. So you need to set an upstream. And now you can click here. It gives you the, in the message, it lets you know that you can create a pull request and you can use this link to do so. As you can see, we merged the PR before with the pull request template. So we now have this template here. We don't have any related issues. So we just want to add this one. Usually if you have a bigger task, you want to be more descriptive here so that someone else that doesn't know the task knows what you are, what the changes are, what you are doing here. So let's create a pull request here. And you can also see the changes below. Okay. Now, here's what I changed. Here's the rest of the file, but since nothing was changed here, it is just folded and we only see the changes here. The red lines are the lines that were removed and the green ones are the new ones. And okay, so we're waiting for this check for broken links to pass. This is in progress. And now let me show you. Like I said, you cannot approve your own content. So here it is grayed out and you have an info because I'm the owner and I created this, this pull request. I cannot approve it. I'm the author. But as the owner of the repository, I can force merge it, but this is bad practice and you shouldn't do it. So once this has succeeded, I can merge it and you will be able to see the changes. But yeah, let's come back to this in a second. Let's go back to the presentation. Yeah, so now I showed you how to do it. Now you can try it yourself. So what I prepared for you is this guide that you just saw, the Markdown basics. So I already explained what it contains here. We also added images, so I'll need to also add that element to the table of contents. Then I have a guide for you, which is also a task. If you want to try yourself, you can learn from this one how to create a GitHub issue template and how to create your own pull requests. So here you have the prerequisites and here you have the steps to do it from the command line interface. You can also do that from the GitHub UI, but this guide is focused on the command line interface. And this is because that is how we work in Kyma. This is not something fancy. This is something that we use on a daily basis. That's how we work. We can see that this is still running because there's this yellow dot. Okay. Now, if you learn Markdown and you create this pull request and you feel like you've got it and you want more, you can also work on real tasks and contribute to our product. Contributions are most welcome. Here are the real issues, documentation issues that we have in Kyma. And as you can see, some of them have the good first issue label. And they are simpler and might be a good starting point if you really want to contribute. So these are the two in Kyma. And we also have another community repository with two more. If I'm clicking too fast, don't worry, you have all the links in the presentation. You'll get the presentation, so you don't need to take notes. We're still waiting for the job. Okay, so let's sum up what we learned today. So now you should know what the documentation process looks like in Kyma. What are the content types that we develop? You should have an idea of what the documentation as code approach means and know certain tools, be familiar with know there exists and they can help you. The version control system, Git, GitHub, and sorry, something broke here. And here are the resources for you that I promised. So this is the Kyma website that you can explore and that you saw at the beginning of the presentation. This here are the docs of Kyma docs that I also showed you at the beginning of the demo. Here you have Kyma blog and release notes. So if you're interested in this type of content, you might want to read it. And we always try to make them interesting and fun to read and not just list the technical facts. So you're welcome to have a look. Here are the guidelines that we use, the guidelines that we apply in Kyma. They are divided into different ones. So there's more general content strategy diagrams. Documentation toggle is something that on the website looks like this, for example. Formatting, links, release notes, screenshots, style and terminology, how to add new documentation, and docs preview. You are also welcome to have a look and read through them. Now, the last two ones are the external links. So they are not connected to Kyma, but they are a very good source of knowledge for if you're interested in documentation and would like to learn more. So the first one is Write the Docs, it's in English. And sorry, the other one is Tech Writer, and this one is in Polish. So you might also explore those. We're still waiting for the job. Okay, so now would be the time for questions, if you have any.
Yes, actually there are two questions. So let's start from the last one. How do you document the code architecture? Do you use auto-generated UML diagrams or something else? This is a question from Mateusz Maniak.
Okay, so if you go to our website, I know that the CLI uses some auto-generated documentation, but mostly we write our documentation ourselves. So Kyma has different diagrams and overviews, like here. And this is something that we create ourselves based on the input that I mentioned. Does that answer the question?
So let's wait for some reaction from Mateusz. But I guess we did. Yeah, Mateusz told. It's not UML is not that. And there is another question. So maybe more private from Mikołaj. Maja's English is great. Did she read all those books behind her back?
Yeah, sure. No, I plan to, but this is just a background that you can use. But I wish, and thank you for the compliment.
Oh, there is another question. So are there any bug bounties or appreciation gifts for most active community contributors on Kyma project? And smile.
So there isn't a process for that, but are you asking as an external contributor or as an employee? Well, being a part of the open source community is fun. It's great. The sense of being able to contribute is also great. And if you're new to the open source world, you might not be familiar with the Hacktoberfest, that is campaign that is organized annually. So every year in October, and the rules changed a little bit this year, so I'm not sure if they are the same every year. But basically, if you fulfill the criteria, which is contribute to open source, create, this year it was at least 4 pull requests, if I'm not mistaken, you are eligible for a t-shirt from them, the Hacktoberfest t-shirt, or you can swap that for a tree. You can instead choose to plant a tree. And you also get a badge on the dev portal. So that is a form of appreciation. And
yes, but
this is fun. Yeah.
So this is fun, and of course, contributing to any kind of open source project, you build your own portfolio. So you are. This is, I think, the most valuable for anybody here. So this is your
because
own
your contributions
portfolio.
are visible to everyone.
Yeah, and also you help us to build Kyma. So it's also
Exactly.
very appreciated. But if you want to be a part of the team of SAP family, so then you can just go to our job offers. I will paste the link once again. So maybe you'll find something suitable for you.
Yeah, you have the links in the presentation as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have any more questions?
I don't see any other questions. So
this job is taking
maybe
a bit
let's
long.
wait 1 minute.
In the meantime, we have a survey. So we would really appreciate it if you could use this link and fill it out to let us know how you like the presentation. I believe Arthur will paste the link in the chat.
It's already there, but it's
great.
I will paste it again. Yep.
And you can also follow us, the Hack Your Career initiative, the program, on Facebook and on GitHub. The links are in the presentation as well. And this presentation will also be posted there in a few days, I think, or within a week.
At the beginning of next week, it should be on the project website.
Yeah. So let me stress again, you will have the links to this repo in the presentation here on the try it slide. And you can go there and try to do it yourself. And if you create such a pull request, I will see that. And you have a chance to have a production-like experience.
Okay, so there are no other questions. So maybe we covered every topic related to technical writer role. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your participation.
Exactly. So
we hope to
have a nice rest of the day.
Yeah,
thanks. Goodbye.
Okay, goodbye. Good night.